Hey everyone, James here coming in to you live from Chiang Mai, Thailand in my guest house here. This is the introduction for the upcoming episode with, former ATTMind Radio alumni Martin Ball. Now this is a different episode. As you've noticed, it's much shorter than the other ones. This is because it's not an interview between Martin and I, but actually an essay that Martin wrote. I'm not exactly sure when he wrote it, but it was a few years ago that I heard him do a telling of this essay through his podcast, Entheogenic Evolution. And the other day, or maybe a couple weeks ago, I thought to myself, no, I'd really like to listen to that again. I had a couple people I felt would really benefit from hearing this, and I contacted him, and I guess that episode had been taken down, and he gave me a fresh recording of it with all sorts of fun effects on the vocals. And permission to release it here through ATTMind Radio, because I feel like it's a really valuable consideration. The information here is very valuable to consider, and it would fit with the ATTMind listening audience. So what I have for you today, if you're watching this on YouTube, is actually also something special, more so than just this cool, well-affected audio clip. Is Martin also submitted to me a bunch of his fractal artwork, and though I'm pretty novice with my video production software, I did my best to pull something cool to look at. So if you're listening to this in your car or at home and you don't have a chance to tune into YouTube, then don't worry about it. Maybe sometime you will, because I don't doubt that you're going to want to listen to this for a second time. But if you are on YouTube, enjoy the visual fractal display. There are links at the end for checking out more of Martin's work, his podcast, Entheogenic Evolution, and his work, his books. And of course, if you're on jameswjesser.com, where this podcast, the show notes are, the links are there, the links are on YouTube. Do the thing, check it out, enjoy this episode.
As you listen, keep in mind that though this podcast features medical and other professionals and regularly speaks on the topic of psychoactive substances in a positive light, nothing heard here should ever be taken as medical advice or as encouragement to consume any of the substances mentioned, especially the ones that are blatantly illegal in your country of residence. Listen critically and always check in with yourself before acting based on anything you hear or read on the internet.
So you want to be enlightened. 18 questions and answers regarding enlightenment. Enlightenment is simultaneously the simplest, most basic thing, and paradoxically, terribly difficult to achieve. This is not because enlightenment itself is difficult. It is because the human ego is confused about both what enlightenment is and how one is to go about achieving it. It is to help clear up this issue that the following is offered as words of advice for any who would seek his or her personal enlightenment. What is enlightenment? Enlightenment is a state of being that is free from the habitual patterning and systematic identification processes of the human ego. The ego is a construct of human consciousness that routinely makes differentiations between what it chooses to identify as self and other or not self. The ego creates these divides within both internal and external perception and experience. As such, the ego is the primary driver of dualistic or divided experience, conceptuality, and identification. Enlightenment is the ability to perceive and experience things as they are without anything added, subtracted, or projected by the ego in its distorted sense of self and other. Enlightenment is the experience of reality minus the confusion and identification of the ego. It is non-dual in nature, and there is no separation between subject and object, self and other. Is enlightenment the same as being liberated or saved? It depends on what is meant by liberated or saved. If these terms are used in reference to the imprisoning and delusional effects of the ego, then yes. If they are used in reference to ideas of liberation from material reality, suffering, or sin, then no. Is enlightenment related to reincarnation and karma? No. Enlightenment is only related to the experience of being right here, right now, non-dualistically. It has nothing whatsoever to do with reincarnation or karma. If anything, belief in reincarnation and karma get in the way of genuine enlightenment and provide ample opportunity for egos to become attached to their projections and make excuses for their behaviors and thought patterns. Is enlightenment related to ethical behavior or morality? No. Ethical systems and moralities are dualistic in nature in that they divide behavior, thought, and experiences into categories of right and wrong, good and bad, etc. All such systems of thought and meaning are products of the ego and are reflective of ego-generated ideals, attachments, and values. These have nothing to do with enlightenment as a direct and immediate experience and sense of being from a non-dual perspective. Is enlightenment related to prayer or worship? No. Prayer and worship are dualistic modes of behavior and therefore are not related to the experience of enlightenment. With prayer and worship, there is a divide between the one praying or worshiping and that which he or she is praying to or worshiping. Enlightenment is non-dual and there is no divide between subject and object. With non-dual being and awareness, there is no one and nothing to pray to and no one to worship. Is enlightenment related to visionary states of consciousness? No. In visionary states of consciousness, there is a divide between subject and object, perceiver and that which is perceived. All visions are, by definition, dualistic in nature. Enlightenment experiences are not visual in nature. Is enlightenment related to paranormal or psychic powers? No. Enlightenment is perfectly ordinary and supremely mundane. It has no necessary connection to anything considered psychic, paranormal, or otherworldly. Enlightenment is not supernatural in any sense. Is enlightenment related to religion or religious practice? Generally, no. While there are religious traditions that promote non-dual awareness, there is no necessary connection between enlightenment and religious practice or belief. It is not necessary to adhere to any religion to become enlightened, and in fact, religious belief and practice are more likely to confuse the ego with constructed objects, values, and attachments than produce any kind of genuine enlightenment. Can enlightenment be achieved through ritual practice? No. Ritual practice is generally highly structured and constrained behavior, coupled with imposed systems of symbolism, interpretation, and meaning. Ritual, in many respects, is the exact opposite of spontaneous, natural activity and behavior. Enlightenment coincides with spontaneity, not predetermined structures and values. Are people who are spiritual, as opposed to religious, more likely to achieve enlightenment? No. People who consider themselves spiritual are generally just as confused by their egos as are people who consider themselves religious. Being spiritual may appear to be less dogmatic and more open than adherence to and identification with traditional religious structures, but this often translates into being more open to the confused and deluded ideas of the ego. being spiritual can easily lead to strengthening the ego through self-identification with concepts and practices that appeal to the ego but do not necessarily bring one any closer to genuine non-dual experience and being. Are spiritual masters enlightened? The actual number of genuinely enlightened individuals is most likely far, far lower than those who claim to be enlightened or to be spiritual masters. While many may talk the talk, very few actually walk the walk. In all probability, most current and historical spiritual masters are, or were, still trapped in the confines of their egos and self-created identities. Anyone who is truly enlightened will see past the need to be identified as spiritual, for enlightenment does not have anything to do with the spiritual. Enlightenment is only concerned with truth and reality. Are shamans enlightened? Not necessarily, and most likely, probably not. Most shamans operate dualistically in that shamanic experience is based on visionary states of consciousness, interaction with spiritual beings, and other such phenomena. As stated above, visionary states of consciousness are not connected with enlightenment or enlightenment experiences, which are transcendent of divisions of subject and object and the perception of self and other. Who can be enlightened? People who have an unwavering commitment to truth are the most likely to have enlightenment experiences or become enlightened. Potentially anyone can experience enlightenment. Practically, very few ever will. Because the ego is so confused and so tenacious, it takes a firm commitment to discovering the truth about the nature of the self to become enlightened. Is an enlightenment experience the same as being enlightened? No. Here, an enlightenment experience would be defined as an experience of the non-dual nature of being. Such experiences tend to be transitory and impermanent. In most situations, the ego and its structures of identification will reassert themselves as soon as possible after the non-dual event. Primarily, non-dual experiences are energetic in nature and can be characterized as a relaxing of the energetic constructs of the ego to allow for expansion and identification with all things or all of reality, which is the non-dual experience. When the energy of expansion wanes, the ego tends to reestablish its own limited patterns. Being enlightened implies a permanent relaxing of the ego and corresponding universal identification and expansion. Is an enlightenment experience an altered state of consciousness? In that it is different from average ego-based dualistic consciousness, yes. Is being enlightened the same as being in a permanently altered state of consciousness? No. Being enlightened can be considered as relaxing in the genuine nature of the mind and being. It is not altered. From this perspective, ego-based consciousness is a deviation from the norm, and not the other way around. Enlightened consciousness is perfectly natural and completely normal or mundane. When do people have enlightenment experiences? They can occur at any time, but the most common times are deep meditation, sexual ecstasy, powerful entheogenic experiences, near-death experiences, or times of sensory overload or deprivation. In these experiences, it is difficult for the ego to maintain its habitual patterns, and they can be temporarily transcended. Powerful entheogenic experiences are the most likely of all these methods to enable reliable and predictable results for the generation of enlightenment experiences, non-dual awareness, and transcendence of the ego. However, there is not a causal connection between any given practice and an enlightenment experience. While certain practices and methods make the experience more likely, they do not cause it to come into being in any way. All such methods only reveal how things already are, and it is up to the individual to become conscious and aware of this, the non-dual nature of being and reality. When is a person enlightened? A person can be considered enlightened when the limiting systems of identification and habitual patterns of the ego have been permanently relaxed and transcended. It is for this reason that enlightenment might also be called liberation. A person may have hundreds of enlightenment experiences, but unless that person is committed to embodying that truth in every moment and is successfully able to take full responsibility for him or herself without attachment to any belief or identity system, then that person is not enlightened.
Hey everyone, I hope that you enjoyed So You Want to Be Enlightened by Martin Ball and really sunk into enjoying his smooth, sultry voice as he talked in a well-affected tonage on the non-dual nature of being and reality, and bore witness to his trippy psychedelic fractal artwork. I want to also say that if you are interested in supporting Martin, you can head to check out his website, which is linked below. It's martinball.net, or you could see more of his art at fractalimagination.com, I believe. Those links are in the show notes to this. I'm sure he would greatly appreciate the direct expression of gratitude in the form of purchasing one of his books. I know that it always feels good when people purchase my books. In regards to support and gratitude, if you're enjoying ATTMind Radio, you know what's coming. Please check out Patreon. This is the platform through which enjoyers of content can directly support creators of content by signing up to pledge a couple dollars per episode in this context, per episode of the podcast, which helps to support not only my financial costs, but also just generally the cost of my time, which I'm going to give anyways because I care about it. It does feel really good to feel that direct support from the listeners. But yeah, please enjoy the continued episodes, share, subscribe, and enjoy your life. Bye.